Today we're getting into what makes economies grow and develop, or sometimes what holds them back. We're talking about the factors that can either boost a country's economic development or create challenges along the way. Let's get started. First up is access to economic and natural resources. This is like having the right tools in your toolbox. Countries with lots of natural resources, like oil, minerals, or fertile land, have a big advantage. These resources can be sold or used to build industries, creating jobs and wealth. But it's not just about having resources, it's also about how you use them. If a country has access to good technology, skilled workers, and capital, that's money to invest, it can develop faster. For example, countries like Saudi Arabia and Canada have grown rich by tapping into their natural resources. Next, we have patterns of trade. Trade is the exchange of goods and services between countries, and it's a huge driver of economic development. When countries trade, they can specialize in what they do best, like making cars, growing coffee, or designing software, and sell those products to other countries. The money they make from trade can be used to improve infrastructure, healthcare, and education, which all contribute to development. However, if a country is heavily dependent on a single export, like oil, it can be risky. If the price of that product drops, the economy can take a big hit. Let's talk about colonial legacy. This is a big one, especially for countries that were once colonies of European powers. During the colonial period, resources were often exploited, and local economies were structured to benefit the colonizers rather than the local population. Even after gaining independence, many former colonies struggle with economic development because of this history. For example, countries in Africa and South Asia often face challenges like underdeveloped infrastructure and economies that are still heavily reliant on exporting raw materials. Corruption is another factor that can seriously hold back economic development. Corruption happens when people in power, like government officials, use their position to benefit themselves rather than the public. This can mean taking bribes, stealing public funds, or making unfair deals. When corruption is widespread, it's hard for businesses to operate fairly, and public services like schools and hospitals often suffer. This slows down development because resources that should be used to improve the country are wasted or stolen. Then there's government expenditures. How a government chooses to spend its money can have a big impact on development. If a government invests in things like education, healthcare, and infrastructure, it can help the economy grow by creating a healthy, educated workforce and a solid foundation for businesses to operate. But if a government spends too much on things like military equipment or uses public funds inefficiently, it can slow down development. Debt load is another important factor. Countries, just like people, can borrow money, but they have to pay it back with interest. If a country borrows too much and can't pay it back, it can get stuck in a cycle of debt. This means that a big chunk of the government's money goes toward paying off debt, instead of being invested in things that could help the country develop, like schools, hospitals, or roads. Foreign ownership of resources is when companies or governments from other countries own a big share of a country's natural resources or businesses. This can bring in investment and create jobs, but it can also be a double-edged sword. If foreign companies take most of the profits out of the country, it doesn't help local development as much as it could. Plus, it can lead to conflicts over who controls these resources. Lastly, let's look at war or political instability. When a country is at war or has a government that's constantly changing or being challenged, it's really hard to develop. War destroys infrastructure, disrupts trade, and makes it unsafe for businesses to operate. Political instability can make it difficult for a government to plan for the future or to implement policies that could help the economy grow. This is why peace and stable governance are so crucial for development. So, what does all this mean? Economic development is like a complex puzzle with many pieces. Some countries have lots of pieces that fit together well, like natural resources, good governance, and strong trade relationships, and they develop quickly. Others face more challenges, like corruption, debt, or a colonial past that make it harder for them to grow. Understanding these factors helps us see why some countries thrive while others struggle, and what can be done to help improve economic development around the world. That's it for today's geography lesson. Remember, the road to development is full of twists and turns, but knowing the factors that contribute can help us understand how to make the journey smoother.